welcome to this panel. We're going to talk about tech news of tomorrow, and we have an amazing panel today. So I will just give yourselves a chance to introduce yourselves. You have 1 minute each to talk about who you are and what you're doing.
Okay. Hi, I'm Louisa Rogue. I'm the international director for HuffPost. That means I oversee all our international operations. We have editions in a dozen countries. We're in 10 languages around the world. A little known fact about HuffPost is that 60% of our traffic actually comes from international. So that's my world, that's what I oversee. And I live in New York, but I'm originally from Denmark.
Right.
My name's Kari Johnson, and I'm a senior AI staff writer at VentureBeat. And most of my focus is, bounces in between the consumer plays of like a Google Assistant or an Alexa, or Face ID from Google for facial recognition to more enterprise stuff. There's been a lot of sort of automation in construction or mining lately. VentureBeat, basically, we have two primary focuses, which are artificial intelligence and gaming, so on the AI side.
Perfect.
Great. I'm Anna Escher. I am the head of audience development at TechCrunch. I'm based in San Francisco. TechCrunch, we're a news site, events company, and I run the strategy and execution for how we grow our readership, and pretty much any touch point with which anyone can interact with our content, whether it's a newsletter or podcasting or video, or other events products and subscription products that we've recently launched.
My name is Nikolai Frank. I'm a local Danish tech journalist. I'm writing for various media, and I'm hosting a new podcast we just launched this week, actually. And formerly I've been at the Danish Broadcasting Corporation, like Denmark's equivalent to the BBC, for over 6 years, writing about tech, yeah.
Congratulations on the launch.
Thank you.
And we have a really nice and diverse panel coming from very different angles of journalists, but what's also great is that I think 3 out of 4 of you are actually trained journalists, as in you have degrees in journalism, so I think you are great people to pick up on this topic. So first thing, let us look at the last, say, 5 years. You all have had more experience than that, so past 5 years, how has the tech news coverage changed for your publication, and how has your own thinking about it changed?
So I can go first. So as a mainstream publication, like these guys are more specialized. We cover like the big societal changes and not like startups necessarily and things like that. And of course, I think the very big overarching storyline for us has been around privacy and some of the challenges around tech. So I would say like we're very skeptical. That's the nature of journalism. We're skeptical. We ask questions, and that's what we've covered in the way that tech has changed how we live, how we all interact with technology, some of the challenges around democracy and all of that. So less on the specific around startups and more generally about the societal change.
I think. If you were to look at coverage of a company like Google or something a couple years ago, there was a lot less scrutiny, I think. I think it's fair to, especially when like Amazon and Microsoft are actively apparently trying to sell facial recognition systems to governments, to treat coverage of them comparable to a nation state. I mean, Denmark has an ambassador of tech in San Francisco now, and they're treating him like a pretty large country. So I think that's fair. That's more of an ambition of sorts. You try to be critical or keep that scrutinizing eye out. And on the privacy side, with the amount of data amassed by these companies, it's only fair to have that sort of some serious questions asked.
Right.
So 5 years ago, and TechCrunch covers funding rounds, startups, new business models that are interesting in the tech startup ecosystem. 5 years ago, these companies were launching and fundraising and raising smaller Series A, Series B rounds. Now they're going public. Now they're merging and acquiring other businesses. So the way that we've covered that throughout the years has been very founder-centric, very startup-centric. And over the years, we've had to become better analysts about what these developing technologies mean, how they fit into the landscape, and especially placing a lot of attention on founders. How do we follow the journey of WeWork or of Tesla throughout the past 5 years? It's also, since there's been more analysis around IPOs, we've had to drive better engaging journalism. So that has included other products like podcasting and newsletters that have helped us do more long form and analysis and engaging forms of content around content that actually needs to be more in depth.
Yeah, I definitely see privacy as well as one of the very big ones that has changed dramatically, and I've also been covering it from more mainstream audience, and a public service media as well, where privacy is just super important. So yes, that is definitely the big change. Like since Snowden, you had Snowden, and then you had like last year the whole Cambridge Analytica thing, and then all the issues with the collection of data. I think that the big things. Yeah.
It's funny because the president of Microsoft actually referred to Cambridge Analytica yesterday as like the 3 Mile Island of the industry, like their big kind of nuclear catastrophe in a way. I mean, I think like that's like that's definitely the overarching theme. And I think it's interesting as a Dane because it's really like the conversation that's been going on in Europe.
Right.
That's been going on. We were ahead in Europe in a way, and that I really think that conversation now is coming to Washington, like things you'd never really talk about before, regulatory changes, and lawmakers and companies themselves actually looking for some kind of regulation. Like I think actually, like I talked to somebody at Facebook before I came here, and he was saying like in some ways Facebook actually want to be regulated because they don't want the responsibility of deciding what's right and what's wrong, and they've realized that they've unleashed this kind of thing in the form of Trump, in the form of Brexit.
Right.
So it's an interesting European conversation going on right now in DC.
Kari?
I think to add to the privacy and the data collection side, the rapid growth of like deep learning systems and just artificial intelligence in general, the predictions that can be made based on that data is what's sort of alarming, I think, for a lot of people, and sort of the other side of that equation of what does all this data mean? Well, we can predict all sorts of things about you.
Right. So it is fair to say that we probably all sort of scrutinize the major tech companies much more than we used to. But then let's switch to another point. So TechBBQ is essentially a startup conference. So what has changed in this case in how you look at startups and how you want to cover startups and whether you want to cover early stage startups at all? Do you see in them those potential big bad actors that could be the next WeWork or Facebook or whatever else? Anna.
Yeah, I guess we cover a lot of startups. We've had to be definitely more selective about the types of companies that we're writing about. Something that we're looking at is impact. Does this company have the ability to create impact in its landscape, whether it's cybersecurity or mobility and transportation or blockchain? It doesn't so much matter about how big the funding round is, who the founder is, what they're like. It's more about assessing the impact and understanding what could this company do, what could they disrupt.
I kind of feel it used to be different though. I think we all used to write about all startups around because there was much fewer of them.
Yeah, I think journalists have had to become more technical, and they've had to understand the verticals a little bit better and become true experts in what they're covering.
I actually have a question also, because like you were saying, like you're focusing much more on the personalities, and I have a suspicion that sometimes you see kind of, like you mentioned WeWork, here's a guy who's like, gosh, like he's like out there, and sometimes you get the sense that like the founders and the people involved are like almost acting up to kind of present this persona who's like a little bit wacky, a little bit like, do you get that sense at all?
Yeah, I think that a lot of the time CEOs and founders are idealized. Look at Elon Musk, look at Adam Neumann. I think that we put way too much fear and faith in these people when really they are humans, and it's our job as reporters and as analysts and critical people to keep track of them and to analyze what they're doing as they continue to amass more power and money.
Absolutely. Karida, how does this work for you?
I think just kind of on a daily basis, just going through my inbox and looking at the pitches that I get. I like coming to events like this because I get to know startups sort of in person. And
that sounds like everyone here should go and talk to you after the talk.
Yeah, you should. Yeah, I mean, I am cognizant of the fact that there is a ratio that is highly imbalanced between the marketing money that some of these startups have, or the investment groups that they're with, or any of that, and the message that I receive. My inbox is full of stuff that I don't want to look at, frankly. And so, I think the scrutiny for startups is big. I'm curious about specific ecosystems and trying to pay attention to the interesting things that can be produced by them. On the AI side, there's a lot of there's a sort of a foundation of research in some places, so that's helpful to know that a place like Pittsburgh is big on robotics, for example. So I mean that helps sort of find companies, but I think it shows often if you actually care about a company you're writing about. Well, care is too far. Hold on. If you find it inspiring or interesting or impactful, and that's sort of, I try to do that on a daily basis.
Sorry, is that social impact, or what kind of impact are you looking for?
Social impact is one. Is your scooter company going to turn all these scooters and bikes into public waste? That's an impact. Predictive policing is definitely going to impact certain communities. So, I think impact, it can be measured in lots of different ways. I do try and listen for the stuff that can have an impact in a positive note. I wrote something about AI research for predicting large wildfires in the western United States earlier this week. That's helpful. That's important, and that's not a business pitch. But it's a novel model, perhaps, or novel AI model that people should know about, and so that's what I look for.
Louisa, you're coming from more of a general interest side of things. How does it work for you, and do you feel that there is actually a gap in the way tech is covered by niche publications like TechCrunch or VentureBeat and by HuffPost and the other general interest media?
So I would say that that gap has probably narrowed. I mean, I think niche publications we actually work for the same company, our parent company is the same, but like niche publications like TechCrunch, if you will, like in a certain way is not more tech positive or more optimistic, but like certainly like we as a general interest publication will always be more skeptical, right? Like,
okay.
And I think we don't, as I said, we don't cover startups as such. But also to your point, like I think that the gap has sort of narrowed because overall the industry's journalists in general have become much more skeptical, and and there has been this enormous proliferation of companies, of startups, so you end up being more critical, and you have to be guarding your inbox a little bit more carefully.
But it is two very different ways of communicating the area, because when your audience is a more general audience, you have to explain everything very much in detail. I cannot write AI or IoT or stuff like that. I have to explain everything every time, and so it's a very different job, to communicate tech to normal people in relation to people who are super interested and know everything about it.
And I think that's actually this is where I think if I could make a little prediction here on the stage, I think that's going to be a more of a conversation, because we'll have people, a new kind of elites, if you will, tech knowledgeable elites, because all the ways in which tech is now changing our society, AI, all that, 5G, and there will be an elite like you guys who will all know what all that means and will get the shorthand, and then there will be some, like my dad, who will be not knowledgeable, and yet all these technologies will impact his life. And I think that is going to be a real kind of schism now in our society going forward, is those who know and understand the technology and those who don't but are still impacted by it.
Right. Nikolai, and from your experience with the public broadcaster, do you feel this need to explain the tech is diminishing over the years, or do you still do same explaining as you had to do 5 years ago?
I think it is more or less the same, really. Because you just have to. You cannot just lose people because they don't understand the concept that you're writing about. So I don't think there's much choice there. But of course, it's progressing. Words that you needed to explain. Some years ago, you maybe don't have to explain anymore.
Right.
I mean, I remember a tech TV show that was on that on Danmarks Radio had to explain in 2009 what a smartphone was, and so of course things are changing.
Right. So you still have to explain, but different things, please.
I just want to. I'm super fascinated by this question. I'm so glad that somebody asked it. It's about Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos, as we all know, the blood testing company. Was there a learning from what happened, and things have changed how startups are covered? I think the premise of the question is a little bit like, yeah, we biggied up Theranos, and like, look what happened. I was going to say, like, look what happened. The press also brought her down. The Wall Street Journal was what uncovered Theranos. It was not like any kind of investors who were skeptical about the company or its claims. It was actually the press. It was actually a journalist at the Wall Street Journal who has a great book. You guys should read it. It's fantastic. And there's now HBO series and everything. So it's just like, yeah, okay, she rose to prominence on these great claims, but also the press helped unmask her. So that would be my thing on that.
I think that's also what sometimes I think people have a misconception about what news and journalism is, and there is definitely a role that these larger consumer-focused tech sites can play in educating people in tech news, but there is need for those investigative reporters who are put here to be experts and expose injustices and discover things. That's the role of a reporter.
I think beat reporters too can say in their reporting sometimes. For example, with AI models, that being specific about how it was trained and the data sets that went into it and the size of the data set and giving sort of specifics like that are helpful. Theranos made several claims continuously, but actually never rolled it out lots of places. They got to Phoenix right, and then it was it was horrible from there on in, basically, when it was actually out there in the world and not some great concept and hope. So being truthful about how far that technology has actually gone in its applications is, I think, important in that specific instance.
Do you have any internal guidelines that would help to avoid repetition of these situations and would have to uncover the bad actors and, scams earlier?
I don't know if it's like guidelines so much as like, again, skepticism and when something sounds too good to be true, it usually isn't true, right? Like, I think continually we see really great coverage from the more niche, the smaller press, but also from the mainstream press. Like again, to kind of laud the Wall Street Journal, but they've just done a terrific series, or they're doing a terrific series on Amazon. And basically, they had a big scoop the other day about how Amazon had changed its algorithm to biggie up its own products against over the objection of its own counsel. It was a great scoop, and they're continuing to be like really hard on the big tech, and I think it's just like about those claims and just like scrutinize. I mean, use the word scrutiny. Like it's just all about scrutiny.
Right. Any particular things to add about guidelines and any questions that you always now need to ask?
I think that venture capital funding is not indicative of the promise of a company. It's very subjective as to how much money a company is able to raise. VC funding does not necessarily indicate that a company is going to be successful or impactful. A lot of that funding can come from personal relationships and single investors who may not even be experts on the tech vertical. So I think that that's something to take into account.
Absolutely. And then the next question would be, but how much skepticism is too much? Can you always be like very skeptical? Can you always try to, trash every new startup because they could be used for something bad? Do you see the sort of red line here that you shouldn't cross?
Is there a distinction between skepticism and just negativity?
I'm not really sure. I'm not sure anymore.
Yeah.
I think, journalists also not these cold, negative people. Like, we want to be hopeful too. I think, we all want a better world. I've been, chatting with people here, and there's some startups that I think sound amazing, and especially in the environmental space and around livability of cities and things like that. And, I can get excited about that. So, yeah, it's a little bit what you were saying, right? Like, you're looking for impact. It's like you're looking for the for that thing that can change how we live, and I think we'll write about that, right?
But it's very important to keep the balance. Of course, you should be super skeptical. But I mean, technology is also a really good thing. We all love tech. So you need to have both sides of it when you cover it. It's also really, really sad if you just read negative stories all the time. So it is a balance, and
Absolutely.
I think that's super important.
And we have 5 minutes left, and since our panel is called Tech News of Tomorrow, then for each of you a couple of minutes, what is Tech News of Tomorrow? How do you see it? What's going to change? Starting from Nikolai.
I don't know what's going to change. I think one thing that has changed is that the role of the journalist, that they're not just writing stories, they are also being experts, they are being a podcast hosts where they are being super personal about their own beliefs, and I think that's one thing that's changing. I think some of the storytelling where you have, for example, like Kashmir Hill doing this series where she tries personally to get rid of Google in her life, that you try it yourself. I think that's a super cool way of telling a story.
Right.
Yeah, I think that the subscription type of monetization and events-based monetization is going to continue to grow in terms of how publishing companies are able to monetize and pay their employees. The ad-driven model probably going to decrease on some of the smaller, more niche sites. I think that advertising and podcasting is going to be a really interesting thing to watch. In terms of reporting, I think that we do need to have more support for these niche reporters, kind of how you were saying, who are truly investigating things and coming up with new angles to explain the world to consumers and people who are interested. I think that also for paid media, I mean, it's getting to a point where consumers are finally realizing that if you want good educational, learning-based content that's going to improve your life and help you grow, you're going to have to pay for it. And so I think that that's going to increase the amount of subscription-driven businesses. Yeah, I think that's what I would say. I would also like to see more venture-backed news organizations.
This is a topic for a totally different panel. This is something we can talk about later. So keep your credit cards ready for more subscription-based news. Harry?
I think one of the things that, I guess, as I get older and I report more, listening to the community that I'm covering just becomes more and more imperative, and trying to just keep the ear to the ground as often as I can is always important. Not sure. And that will play a role in business model. I think as online advertising plays less of a role as your banner ad is gone. And so social driven traffic is different than it was a couple years ago. And so I think that's playing a role in the business model that's being created. So rallying community around a publication, I think, is really important. And I think listening to your audience is another important one, and along with the scrutiny of companies who are actively fighting several antitrust.
Right.
I feel like I could not vigorously enough. I just so wholeheartedly agree. I think listening to the audiences, and like as a sort of closing idea, I think one of the first industries that were disrupted was the news industry, right? Disrupted by technology, and what that disruption has meant. Yes, it has meant a big challenge in terms of our financial models and all the rest of it, but it has also meant that we're finally listening to our audiences. Like when I first started in journalism, we had no idea what people wanted to read. So we wrote all these things that people were not actually interested in reading about. Now, yes, we can measure everything down to the nth degree, and we listen to our audiences. We listen to them in terms of all the metrics and all the things that, the tech, all the ways in which tech allows that to happen, and I think it has really, at HuffPost, our credo, our belief is we hear you, people first, and we hear you. It's all about the audiences, and I think that revolution tech has brought about, and I think that's at least one thing to be grateful for.
Perfect. Thank you so much. This is all we have time for today. Please give a round of applause to this amazing panel.
Thank you so much, guys. Thank you. That was super interesting.